Hey guys, FilmCrazyAdam here, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About. Today's episode of Let's Talk About is going to be a little different since I'm not going to be reviewing a movie. Instead, we're going to return to that world of depression and darkness and horror where nothing makes sense and yet was somehow typed up and put into a movie. Yes, it is time once again for another adventure in bad script writing. When I last talked about bad script writing, I talked about what you're allowed to have expectations for going into a fantasy and science fiction movie. Well, today, we're going to be talking about plot contrivance. What is plot contrivance? Well, we know what a plot is, but what is contrivance? For that, we need to actually look up the definition of the word contrivance and also its root word, contrived. So contrivance, first definition, the use of skill to bring something about or create something. All right, copy that. Let's take a look at that second definition. A device, especially in literary or artistic composition, which gives a sense of artificiality. Okay, one definition down. Now let's look at contrived. Deliberately created rather than arising naturally or spontaneously. Created or arranged in a way that seems artificial and unrealistic. Okay, and so I cannot tell you, it's uncountable, the number of intense arguments I've had with my friends back in Jersey over this exact topic. Because, I mean, without getting too much into it at this point, I'll just say this, that like, I say, well, this movie's contrived. And they say, well, all movies are contrived. And according to the definition of the word contrivance, yeah, they're not wrong. I mean, it was created in somebody's mind and typed up on a piece of paper. So yeah, I mean, it's contrived. But here's the thing, and this is where my argument comes into play, and it's the second definition of contrivance and the entire definition of contrived, which is, yes, the story's manufactured, but it shouldn't feel manufactured. And I can go on about this, but I think I can better illustrate this with some examples. But first, let's actually break down the word, what plot contrivance is a little bit better. And I can sum it up and illustrate it in two terms. Plot armor and the plot railroad. Plot armor is used to refer to the phenomenon in fiction whereby the main character is allowed to survive dangerous situations because they are needed for the plot to continue. Okay, and so what does that mean? What is plot armor? Well, okay, think about any situation in like an action or a war movie where you have the protagonist and he's running through and he's trying to make his escape, or he's like, you know, escorting somebody to an extraction point, and it's a gunfight, it's a firefight, there's bullets flying everywhere, and they make it out of the scene completely unscathed, not even like, you know, a glancing blow or a twisted ankle. I mean, hell, like their back isn't even stiff. Meanwhile, everyone else, like all the special forces and all the backup guys around them, they're getting mowed the fuck down. They're just, and everyone's just dropping like flies, and it's only the main character that somehow got out alive. That's plot armor. The biggest, like the greatest shining example of what plot armor is can be no better exemplified than at the beginning of the fourth Indiana Jones movie, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. You remember that scene where old man Indy gets into a refrigerator, a lead-lined one of all things, at the site of an atomic bomb test. You know, refrigerators, as we all know, are not as dense as, let's say, bank vaults or bomb shelters. You know, they're just thin sheets of metal with a bit of insulation in there. You know, they're not very armored. But for some reason, he gets inside, and instead of the bomb just vaporizing him or crushing the house, which would then crush the refrigerator like a tin can. No, instead, despite it doing this to all the other buildings and mannequins and vehicles at the bomb site, no, instead, the bomb decided to kick this refrigerator like it was kicking a freaking field goal and sends it over a mile through the air, easily over a mile through the air, to not embed in the ground in the desert floor, but no, to then tumble ass over tea kettle for like probably the length of a football field before coming to a stop where old man Indy is not in fact dead and every single bone in his body is shattered. No, he rolls out of it and stands up like it was nothing. Like, I mean, I can't fucking deal with this shit because here's the thing, like, you know he's not gonna die. I mean, like, okay. Well, I mean, to the writers, do you really think you're building tension? I mean, okay, you put him in this situation where death is assured and where he couldn't possibly survive. And, oh God, what are we going to do? He's your title character for the fourth movie in a row. And you're only 4 minutes into this fucking movie. I mean, you're not going to kill him. You kill him, the movie's over. So there's literally no tension to this scene. Or even a question as to whether he's going to survive a fucking atomic bomb. I mean, it pisses me off when I see this because I feel like I'm being treated like I'm a fucking idiot. Like, the scriptwriters think they are so clever that they really have us on the edge of our seats, that we thought Indy might actually die. Like, really? Like, pisses me off. And there are tons of people that are more than happy to just limp-wristedly hand wave that away and give that scene a pass, which that also pisses me off. The film crazy's coming. The crazy's coming out in this one. Moving on. While I couldn't find a definition online for plot railroad, it's actually an easy concept to explain. Kind of like a train. You know how a train cannot deviate off its path and must stay on its tracks until it reaches its destination? Well, in movies, the plot railroad is when events will inexplicably happen against all logic, all luck, all laws of physics, or even quantum level mathematical probabilities to achieve an end result. An example of that would be in Jurassic World. Now, despite everything that has been learned from the incidents in the first trilogy, and despite the fact that there were at least a dozen different ways to verify the Indominus Rex was still in the pen without actually needing to go in the pen, or better yet, don't open the big ass fucking door that it could escape through, you knew that come hell or high water, that fucker was getting out. One way or another, it was happening. Because no one wants to watch a slice of life movie about people enjoying a happy, safe, fun-filled day at a theme park with dinosaurs. It's boring. No one would go see that. Of course not. You have no story. If dinosaurs ain't chomping people, no one cares. So this is where the plot railroad comes into play. That dinosaur was getting out whether it made sense or not. You see what I'm getting at? And so that brings me to the focus of this video, which is Captain America Civil War. This is the third Captain America movie and the 13th movie in the MCU. Now, first and foremost, I want to preface my tearing apart this movie with the fact that I want to say that I enjoyed this movie. I do. Genuinely, I like this movie. Despite all of its shortcomings and plot holes and contrivances that I'm about to point out, I like this movie enough to buy this when it came out on Blu-ray, and I still own it 6 years later. So let me make that clear. I like this movie. I enjoy this movie. That being said, here I go, and I'm going to tear it a new asshole. Now, for those of you that haven't seen this movie, I'm going to sum up the plot for you in one sentence. Bad guy emotionally tears apart the Avengers. That's it. That's the whole plot. I shit you not. A bad guy comes up with a plan to break down the semi-stable relationship that the two main Avengers, Iron Man and Captain America, have, and pits them against each other in an attempt to have them kill each other. And if that doesn't work, at the very least, their feelings are going to be hurt and they don't want to work together with each other. Still a win. So how does he do that? Well, it's a bit more complicated than, just, stealing Tony's lunch from the break room fridge and then leaving a note that says, "You suck," from Steve. How complicated? Well, just sit back and try and keep up. This movie is basically the embodiment of the phrase, "just go with it." So let's ride this wave of contrivance and see where the hell it takes us. This whole process starts back in 1991, but we'll get to that later. Instead, let's look at this scene where Tony is introduced into the movie at about 13 minutes in. In this scene, Tony is giving a demo and a speech at MIT. During this whole thing, he's reading from a teleprompter. Included at the end of the speech is a mention of Pepper Potts, whom Tony has romantic feelings for, but events have happened and the two are currently not getting along. Seeing Pepper's name has an emotional impact on Tony, and he pauses before announcing that all students present will have their research fully funded by Stark Industries. The auditorium erupts in applause. Tony then walks off stage, still clearly affected by thinking about Pepper, and asks one of the people around him where the bathroom is before exiting backstage into a hallway where the door to the men's room is directly in front of him. Now, instead of going into the restroom, he looks left and sees a woman staring at an elevator. Tony approaches her and engages her in conversation, which starts off innocuous enough before the woman pulls out a pic of her son, who died during the events of Age from Ultron. The guilt trip works, and Tony feels bad for his indirect involvement in the incidental death of this person while he was saving the world, granted from a monster of his own creation. This puts him firmly on the side of a political issue in direct opposition to Cap, the issue being whether there should be a committee that decides how or if the Avengers will respond to any kind of threat. Cap believes that the bureaucracy of deciding on a course of action will be complicated by agendas and slowed to a process that might take hours to decide where seconds matter. Tony, on the other hand, solely based on this guilt trip, believes that there needs to be checks and balances in a situation that could have global implications where someone needs to be held responsible where collateral damage and loss of lives is a high probability. So to set up the situation where Iron Man and Captain America are at political odds with each other, you first need Tony to feel guilty. And to do that, first he has to have this conversation with this woman. And now, let's take a closer look and see exactly what transpires, what events happen that get him in proximity and then into conversation with this woman. Because this is it. Like, this whole thing, this whole movie, more or less, depends on him talking with this woman. So, let's go back and break down the steps that got Tony talking to that woman, shall we? The first step is when Tony is giving his speech. Okay, so at this point, he's reading from a teleprompter. Now, let's say Tony doesn't see Pepper's name. He had talked to the person typing up the script and said, make sure her name's not in there. And, the person corrects it, done and done. And then Tony doesn't have an emotional, hiccup. And Tony being Tony would, after everyone erupts in applause, he would glad hand his way through the crowd, probably make his way out the front door, get in his car and go away. That's it. And he's gone. He never talks to this woman. So first step is that Pepper's name has to be in that script. And even then, Tony, maybe he's not emotionally compromised and he just goes, whatever. He shrugs it off and still glad hands everyone, gets in the car and drives away. Completely plausible. So step one is he has to see her name and then has to have an emotional hiccup, which then leads him to his next step, which is Tony goes backstage. Now Tony's backstage. Now what? Well, now he's got the option of going to his green room because that MIT's got a green room because they've got dozens of guest speakers a year. So there's definitely a room set aside where they can be comfortable and have their privacy and get ready for their presentations. So he can either go back to his green room and have his privacy, or he can go with one of his handlers who will then escort him out to his car where then he could drive away. Or we can do what he did in the movie, which he said, where's the bathroom? Is it back this way? Yeah, okay, bye. Or he could have left through a different door backstage, because no doubt there's more than just one door backstage, but for whatever reason, he goes out that door. So between all those choices, green room, leaving, going out a different door, he goes out that door, which then leads it to step 3. He has now stepped out the back door into the hallway where the men's room is right in front of him. Now he's got a bunch of choices here as well. First choice would be to go into the men's room, where at which point, maybe he actually needs to take a piss, or, he's going to have a little emotional moment. He has his privacy, splash some water on his face, and then just leave. That's an option. Or he can look right and just decide, I'm going to wander this way. Or he can look left, which is what he does. And he sees the woman, which now leads to step 4, which is upon seeing the woman, what does he do? Well, he's just had an emotional moment and he wants to be alone. So upon seeing her, he really has no reason to go talk with her. He could continue on into the bathroom or just say, oh, there's somebody over there, I'm going to go this way instead. But instead, he not only turns left, that leads to step 5. Upon seeing her, what do we do now? Do I want to talk to her? Well, I'm kind of having an emotional moment right now. I kind of want to be by myself, and I don't want to go with her. Or I can go over to her. So he decides to go over to her, which now brings us to step 6. Upon going over to her, he doesn't just walk past her. He actually stops there and then engages her in conversation. Those are the 6 steps that Tony goes through that gets him from the stage to this woman. This is a chain of events where if literally one of those links breaks, that in one of those 6 scenarios, Tony decides to do one thing different. Just one thing that I gave one of those options for. Like I said, instead of getting flustered, he glad hands his way through the audience. He never talks to that woman. Instead of going out the back and going back door and going to his green room, he never sees that woman. Instead of just going into the bathroom and ignoring her, he never sees that woman. All these things have to happen in exactly that order. If Tony does something different, he never has that conversation with that woman. You can't plan for that shit. And that's the point. What was her plan? Her entire plan to drop this guilt bomb on Tony consisted of her driving or flying from wherever she lived, most likely from out of state, to Boston, Massachusetts, getting to MIT, and then getting into the speaking engagement by Tony Stark, and then instead of being in the audience, she decided to hang out in a hallway behind the stage in the incalculably extreme unlikely chance that Tony would walk out that stage door and then grow oddly interested in her standing there, enough so that he actually becomes curious enough to come over and talk with her, despite her not calling him or making any attempt to get his attention. In fact, she looks like she's ignoring him. That's contrivance!
It's not possible. Not probable.
When shit happens unnaturally for no other reason, I mean, flying in the face of logical explanation, against all conceivable odds, and for no other reason than if it doesn't happen, I mean, this shit needs to happen, or else the rest of the story can't. It's contrived as fuck, and you are on the plot railroad. Welcome aboard. Shit's gonna happen because the plot needs it to. The brain breaks when you actually stop and think about it. Like, she just went into this hallway, and then Tony, like, this whole conversation depended on half a dozen things happening in a very specific order for Tony to get to her, let alone the fact that she first had to get there and plant herself on that spot. God. And you know what? I'm not done with this yet. For this movie, it doesn't end there. The full emotional breakdown and destruction of Tony and Steve's relationship happens when Tony is shown a VHS recording of CCTV footage from when his parents died. This is the part that goes back to 1991 that I was talking about, and it mentions when Tony's parents reportedly died when his father lost control of his car and crashed it, killing him and his wife. Well, what actually happened was they were killed by the Winter Soldier, Cap's friend Bucky, when he was sent on a mission to recover something from Howard Stark and was told to leave no witnesses. Without getting as in-depth into it as I just did with that MIT scene, the linchpin in this whole thing is required that Tony and Steve are both standing in an abandoned Hydra base in Siberia at the exact time in front of the exact same TV screen. Which, if, number one, Tony hadn't gone to the ocean jail where Falcon was imprisoned, and number two, Falcon didn't cave and tell Tony where Cap was, he never would have been there. It also required, number one, that there was still power in the abandoned Hydra facility, and number two, all the TVs still worked after at least 25 years in sub-zero temperatures, and number three, that there was a VCR and all of its hookups still worked in that facility. I'm not even going to question where Zemo got the VHS tape, or how or why a recording from 1991 was put on a VHS tape, or how it survived 25 years on a VHS tape, or how Zemo, some dude who until a year ago lived with his wife in Eastern Europe, but somehow learned about this recording and inexplicably got his hands on it. Or let's not talk about the crazy coincidence that the recording even exists, because what are the chances that during the Winter Soldier's attack on Howard Stark's car, that it just so happened to crash into a pole perfectly dead center in the middle of the field of view of this one CCTV camera on this road, giving the perfect perspective and view of the horrific brutality that Bucky inflicted on Tony's helpless parents, and even being cooperative enough to wait until he's done murdering the Starks before staring directly into the camera to shoot it out instead of doing so beforehand. And fuck me, that's some sharp footage. There's security cameras today that don't have quality even half as good as this camera from 1991. And yeah, there you go. That's plot contrivance. The whole point of this movie was to get Iron Man and Captain America to break up. And it all came down to them watching that video, and before that, it required Tony to feel guilty about what happened. The producers and the writers already knew how this movie ended years before they put pen to paper, and they were going to square peg, round hole this shit and make it work no matter how contrived it was, because they needed it to have that ending. And that's that. That's my essay on how Captain America 3 is contrived as fuck. Again, despite my tearing it a couple new assholes, I still enjoy this movie. Objectively, I see how it fits into the MCU and why the Captain America Iron Man breakup had to happen. I love the introduction of Tom Holland as Spidey in this one, and also Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther. I can like it and still call it out for its bullshit. So like I stated before, yes, all stories are contrived because they're manufactured in someone's mind, but they shouldn't feel contrived. If the scriptwriter is worth a damn, they'll tell a story where the plot flows from point A to point B to point C naturally, instead of point A to F to N to the number 5 to a yield sign to point C, only briefly mentioning point B in passing. Now, having railed against contrivance and everything, I'm now going to talk out the other side of my mouth and say that I got to give credit where credit is due, and there is a degree of contrivance to damn near every story. I mean, the goal should always be to tell a good story without it feeling contrived. A great example would be the first Back to the Future movie. At the beginning of the movie, we learn about this lightning bolt that hits the clock tower, and at the time, it's just something annoying that broke up a romantic moment. But later, it becomes the goal and focal point of the movie.
Bucky, All we need is a little plutonium.
Oh, I'm sure that in 1985, plutonium was available in every corner drugstore, but in 1955, it's a little hard to come by. Marty, I'm sorry, but the only power source capable of generating 1.21 gigawatts of electricity is a bolt of lightning.
What did you say?
A bolt of lightning. Unfortunately, you never know when or where it's ever going to strike.
We do now.
It's now the primary objective, and Doc and Marty have to race to have everything set up and good to go before they run out of time. The writer brilliantly set up the lightning bolt ahead of time in a way that was actually very forgettable, but in doing so, they laid the groundwork for later on in the film. They don't just randomly pull something out of their ass in a Deus Ex Machina moment to get Marty back to the future because they wrote themselves into a corner with shitty writing. No, it actually, like I said, it lays the groundwork. It sets it up so that you can knock them down later. I mean, it flows. You didn't even think about it the first time you saw that movie. You're like, what's this woman talking about lightning bolts? Get the hell out of here. And then later on, you're like, oh my God, that actually matters. That's an example of good writing. Another example of good writing is it's a great movie when the main characters aren't wearing plot armor. It means more when the characters get injured or killed. Like the first time you see Luke lose his hand in Empire Strikes Back, or when Evie gets stabbed and dies in The Mummy Returns. In both instances, you're like, what the fuck?
Holy shit!
Though, to be fair, there are those movies where the whole plot revolves around unlikely bouts of great luck, numerous coincidences just one after the other, events that have better timing than the Japanese train system and are basically just the embodiment of the word contrived, like the National Treasure movies, Bullet Train, and even Van Helsing. These movies are contrived as fuck, but they know it and they don't try to deny it. Hell, they embrace the fact. And I like them because of that. So just because it's contrived doesn't mean you can't like it. On the same note, it's actually okay to like bad movies. Just admit that they're bad. There's nothing wrong with liking bad movies. Hell, I got plenty of bad movies that I like. Star Wars Episode 1, Ghost Rider, Van Helsing, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the sequel. These movies are garbage. They're bad, but I still like them. Thing is, I know that they're bad. I'm not trying to pretend that they're anything good. I enjoy them for what they are, and, I derive some form of entertainment from these. But again, I know that they're not good movies. And yes, that's quantifiable. There is such a thing as you can quantify what a bad movie is, and that'll be another video, another time. Okay, let me give you a food analogy. It's like a McDonald's Quarter Pounder with cheese. A Quarter Pounder with cheese, sure as shit, ain't a USDA certified AAA ribeye steak grilled to perfection. It's junk food. It's garbage. It's crap. The thing is, I know it's junk food. I don't try to pretend and try to lie. Oh man, this Quarter Pounder with cheese, this is some high living right here. This is some good shit right here. It's junk food. I know it is, and I don't pretend that it's not. I still like it, and that's okay. It's fine to like it, but I know what it is. I admit what it is. I don't try to lie to people and say it's something that it's not. Can you see where I'm getting at here? And that's all I'm trying to say is that you can like whatever you want. Just like it for what it is and admit what it is. And with that, this is the perfect spot. I'm going to end it right here. I've gone on about this long enough. I hope I've given you some kind of insight as to how you view movies, if I haven't ruined it for you altogether. As always, I greatly appreciate you sticking around this long. If you enjoyed this review, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. If there's anything you're interested in me reviewing in the future, please comment and let me know. That's all I got for you now. Talk to you later.